progress of the Iraqis themselves. And, Mr. President, I am delighted to be able to come and give a very unbiased and hopefully unvarnished and very plain recitation of the remarkable changes that have taken place in that country. Now, we all know that a year ago in this body we had serious debate over the fate of our effort in Iraq. There were calls for us to withdraw. There were declarations that we had lost. There were other challenges that were brought forward. But finally, difficultly, the commitment by the President to commit to an increase of troops in the surge and follow the anti-insurgency plan of General Petraeus and put General Petraeus in charge finally became a reality. And about mid-year on the ground in Iraq, the deployment was complete and they began exercising the plan. Let me try and give you an idea of what Iraq today is like compared to Iraq 1 year ago. When I landed at the Baghdad airport, for the first time I drove by car, by armored vehicle, into downtown Baghdad. Every year back there before, we had to fly in Apache helicopters in avoidance techniques because of the ground fire and the danger. Arrived in Baghdad in the green zone and spent the night. Every trip before to Iraq, they took us out to Kuwait City and to a Sheraton hotel when darkness fell in Baghdad because it was so dark. Twice during the course of the visit, we got outside of the green zone, into Chevy Suburbans in one case, into an MRAP in the other case, and went out on 2 excursions. And I'd like to talk about those 2 excursions for a second. The first was in an MRAP. And I have to pause here and pay great tribute to Senator Biden. About 18 months ago, Senator Biden led the charge in this body for us to fund the MRAPs to try and do away with the tragic loss of life that was taking place to IEDs on the ground and on the roads in Iraq and in Baghdad. General, there's no question in this body that the most strident voice in favor of that funding and that commitment was the senator from Delaware. Today, the soldiers of the United States of America and of Iraq and of our coalition partners ride in the new MRAP vehicles. General Petraeus told me in the dinner that I had with him, in the first 5 hits where an IED exploded under an MRAP, there was not a single scratch of an American serviceman. Now, I know a week ago we lost our first serviceman in an MRAP, but that serviceman was the gunner who was above the turret at the time he was hit. It has a 100% record on those inside in terms of transporting those troops. And it's a marvelous piece of equipment, and it's a great testimony to this body, Republican and Democrat alike, to rise to the occasion to see to it when our men and women are threatened. If there is a technique, if there is a technology, if there is engineering sufficient to bring about a new product, we'll do it and we'll fund it. We did it on the MRAP, and today our soldiers are safer and our efforts stronger. And I rode in one of those NRAPs to a neighborhood known as Gazaria. And Gazaria was a neighborhood that was completely destroyed 2.5 years ago. I went to a market that had about 20 shops, of which about half were open, and traveled with a squad headed by a lieutenant colonel who was making micro grants and micro loans and measuring the progress of previous loans that had been made to Iraqis who were reopening their stores. Senator Cornyn, Senator Coleman, and myself stood in a bakery and ate Iraqi type of flatbread and drank tea in a market that had been totally destroyed and unoccupied for 2.5 years. We went to an auto repair shop where 2 brothers had reopened the shop and were getting to do repairs and had bought a generator to provide them with reliable, continuous electricity. These are microloans made by the United States of America to Iraqi people to reinvest in themselves, reinvigorate their enterprise, reinvigorate their employment. Was it dangerous? Sure. We had on bulletproof vests, we had on helmets, and we traveled in MRAPs. But heretofore, you could have never gone on the ground in downtown Baghdad like we did on this trip. And twice, we ran into local Iraqis. Once 2 Sunnis who joined the Awakening Movement and the CLCs who were taking up arms to guard the secured market to see to it that no terrorist or insurgent could come in and do damage. And then twice to refugee families who over 2 years ago had left Baghdad and Gazaria with no intention of ever returning. But now, because of its relative security, they returned. The second trip was made by Chevy Suburban, not by armored tank or not by MRAP. It left the green zone, went through Baghdad to the government building where we met with Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish leaders. And for the first time in my annual trips back there, the talk was substantive, and the inference on the part of the leadership were that things were getting ready to happen. And as all of us know, on de-Ba'athification and reconciliation, things have started to happen. And as the President acknowledged in his speech last night, they'll be happening provincially in terms of sharing of the oil revenues and eventually a hydrocarbon law for the entire company. My point in bringing this story to the Senate and telling it firsthand is the progress the President described last night is real, it is tangible. Things are changing in Iraq, and they're changing for the better for the Iraqis and for us. We have brought back 2 groups, and as the President said, we'll bring back 5 more without replacing them this year. Our troop level will be going down. We're going from a combat confrontation to an oversight role in terms of helping and providing logistics to the Iraqis. And have the Iraqis responded? Think about this, Mr. President. Remember about 6 months ago when the Prime Minister of Great Britain said they're pulling the British troops out of Basra? The American press wrote about another failure, one of our partners leaving. What were we going to do? Nobody's written about Basra since then, because you know what happened? All of the Brits who left were replaced by Iraqis, not by Americans, not by coalition forces. Have you read about damage or problems in Basra? No. You haven't, because the armies performed magnificently, the Iraqi army. Today we read of reports in Mosul, and we mourn the tragedy of the loss of 5 U.S. soldiers. But in that big attack going on against one of the last strongholds left of the insurgents and al-Qaeda, the spear of that attack, the point of that attack, is all Iraqi soldiers. Now, I had the privilege to meet with Iraqi generals who, for the first time, see themselves energized, see themselves fully capable of assuming the role that we've taken for so long, for us to move to oversight and for them to move to the point of the spear. The practical matter is this: whatever mistakes may have been made in the past, whatever differences we may have had, the young men and women of the United States of America have performed magnificently. General Petraeus, every single promise of hope that we had for him. And in the name and the memory of those tragic loss of life in Iraq, Georgia soldiers like Diego Rincon, Lieutenant Noah Harris, Sergeant Mike Stokely, and the other 119, the sacrifice they've made has not been in vain. And we are on the doorstep, hopefully, of building and helping to have created a democracy that will last and endure in the Middle East. And hopefully it'll be the first step of many to accomplish the hope of peace, freedom, and liberty that we in this country so often take for granted, but the rest of the world cherishes. So the President was right last night in his State of the Union. We've made great progress. There's work left to be done. But there is the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a locomotive. It's the light of hope for liberty, for peace and freedom, because of the sacrifice and the endurance of the fine young men and women of the United States military serving in harm's way today in Iraq. Mr. President, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. President, the Senator from Vermont.
I ask to be recognized as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last night I listened intently to President Bush's State of the Union speech. Frankly, I had a hard